My presentation is covering the topic of leveraging user stories in Agile transformation, where I discuss a value-driven approach to documenting requirements for Agile teams. This summer, I worked as a data and analytics intern, which was my external title, but internally as a business analyst intern at IQVIA here in Durham. And here I have some of my projects listed under the direction of Pamela Backus, who I think has joined the call. Thank you for joining today. She is a IT director and also a certified Scrum Master and leads two teams, one being data sciences, safety, and regulatory data business unit, and the other being the data solutions department. And so under her direction, I was exposed to a couple of different projects, some I've listed here. The first two being the Connected Devices Project and a Clinical Data Repository Tabular project. The underlying task for both of these projects was to create user stories based on feature requests or product requests from our business unit who work on the behalf of clients. And so I was able to work alongside very experienced and talented business analysts who were able to walk me through the process of eliciting requirements from different units within the organization, including product owners, UX designers, development team members, to really drill down to understanding the value that a request from a client, how it adds value to their processes and just overall productivity. And so what I'll be presenting on today more specifically is the process improvement project here at the bottom. And I'll be discussing the best practices for creating user stories. And so IQVIA, like many other technology companies across all industries, are at an impasse where now we've entered into this era that some are referring to as a fourth industrial revolution, where we're seeing this merge or kind of blurred lines between our physical, biological, and digital lives. And so with that, this presentation discusses how we can leverage user stories, which is a requirements artifact, to transition into more agile workflows so that our development processes are not only lean, but also value-centric. And so I think it's best to start here with the first principle in the Agile Manifesto, which states, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. And so what this does is give Agile teams their first and foremost priority, really highlights customer satisfaction and delivering valuable software both early and often. And so the result of my project was a PowerPoint presentation that was aimed at really bringing customer value to the forefront of the discussion on best practices in creating user stories, and how user stories can be further leveraged to deliver value. And so the objectives here are Agile philosophy on customer value, documenting customer value with user stories, reinforcing customer value with quality attributes, and then navigating customer value with the inspect and adapt approach. So we'll start with the Agile philosophy on customer value. And I think it's important to add some context here as well. So Agile transformation, as I mentioned, is affecting all industries. Again, we're seeing a huge merge between just digitization in our day-to-day lives. And the goal is to incorporate this technology in a way that adds value to a person's life, in addition to incorporating it in a way that is non-destructive, but instead just facilitates greater productivity overall. And so here we have some of the some general statistics. First one here says 71% of companies are implementing Agile. A lot of resources state that this number will increase exponentially over the next few years. Also, we have Agile adoption has helped out 98% of companies who have chosen to adopt those practices. Then 60% of companies experience revenue growth and profit increase after using the Agile approach. And then the success rate for Agile compared to the waterfall methodology is 1.5 times more successful than the waterfall model, where the Agile success rate is 42%, compared to waterfall success rate of 26%. And so for for those of you who are wondering, what does it mean to be agile? Well, one of the greatest lessons that I learned over the summer is that agile itself is more of a way of thinking. It doesn't necessarily dictate how we achieve that specifically. It's more so about creating a mindset that allows us to work in a more lean fashion. And so here are just some high level pointers on what that looks like. So first and foremost, not everything needs to be figured out right away. We can delay the details until we decide that a feature or a product is of high value to a customer. And once that's decided, we can begin to further elaborate and learn as we go. And then the other integral point is getting feedback early and often. Agile requires the participation of both customers and development teams and product owners and testers. And with so many different moving parts, it is important that we organize our workflow to include milestones where we can stop and ask the customer, is this what you are looking for? And be able to adapt to that feedback. Which takes me to the next point, to be able to anticipate and quickly adapt to change. And so I think this is one of the greatest benefits of agile workflows, is that we anticipate that requirements will change, as they always do. And the agile mindset allows us to remain focused on continuous delivery, but also be prepared to make tweaks along the way. And then lastly, this agile way of thinking, as I showed earlier in the presentation with the first principle from the Agile Manifesto, is that the number one priority is the focus to bring value to customers. And so we see on the right here that the typical project constraints are pretty much flipped on their head, where there are fixed deadlines, and so work is divided amongst different intervals of time known as sprints that usually range from 2 weeks to 1 month. And within that time frame, you are deciding, okay, what work can we accomplish within this time constraint? Also, a fixed constraint is cost. And then at the bottom, we see that the estimated constraint becomes the goal. And this really just goes back to the idea that one, we won't know everything up front, and so it's hard to say what the final product will look like. And so having this flexibility on the goal, again, allows us to adapt as we learn more from our customers and get feedback from them. And so what this looks like as it pertains to Scrum is we end up with this product backlog that um, is normally compared to the shape of an iceberg, where majority of the items that exist in the product backlog lie below the surface. And we see here that that denotes future releases. And so this is where you would see vision, strategy, and ideas for new features and tools. The size here represents the level of granularity, where the larger items that we don't have as much information on, or maybe we haven't prioritized as something valuable to the customer, are at the bottom of the pyramid. And then as we move towards the top to the waterline, so to speak, the chunks get a lot smaller, where when we reach the waterline itself, or surface, this is where our user stories would come in. And these are just smaller chunks of work. Usually these chunks of work can be executed within 2 to 3 days of in production or in development. And so the task becomes, once we hit this borderline, how do we narrow down the work into a small chunk of work that is independent of each other, that is valuable to the customer. Again, we're aiming to deliver this within 2 to 3 days. And so an estimatable and small, and then more so testable chunk of work. And so in the release phase, again, we enter into this workflow of defining user requirements using user stories, so that when it's added to the sprint, these are implementable items that can be used to build out features. And so this is important because research shows that 80% of value typically resides in 20% of features. And then the rest are okay, but not as important. And then 65% of features provide little to no value and are rarely used and or actually desired by the customer. Another way of looking at this is something that I've taken from some of the research that I've done so far, where the Oxford University Press provided these visuals. The first one denoted the probability of introducing defects, which is really high during the requirements phase and into the modeling phase, but the probability of introducing defects in testing and release is exponentially or significantly low. Conversely, we see that the cost of fixing defects during the requirements phase is very low or minimal, whereas to fix defects after they've been released becomes exponentially high. And so with that, value becomes our slicing mechanisms across all levels of granularity and levels of planning. This is what we use first and foremost to prioritize our development efforts. And as you can see, there are some other factors that should be accounted for that include cost, risk, and knowledge. But our first pass in understanding what to prioritize and bring to the surface and then into the release and the sprint is really driven by value first and foremost. And so some of you may be wondering why user stories. Revealing something too fast. All right, so user stories, when we think about a tool that allows us to be flexible, that focuses on the value that the feature or software product brings to the customer, and that facilitates the conversation between all of the different entities involved in the development of a product. User stories are uniquely designed to accomplish all of those things. It documents the value that the software brings to the customer. It's lightweight in the sense that they were developed originally on 3x5 note cards that you could write on, that you could kind of hold up and move around. And more so than that, if you decided that it was not relevant anymore, you could just tear up and keep moving along to get the other stories. And then finally, user stories are a promise for conversation. This is something that in my work over the summer that was a very prominent learning aspect, and that user stories really drove action towards meeting with the necessary people to understand and drill down to the specific value and how that value would be implemented. And that just involved, again, people from the user interface design department, or the product owner who could describe on the requirement from the on the customer's behalf. We even spoke with some of our data specialists and things like that. Again, just having those conversations to truly understand what the value is to the customer. And so this is something that I saw another business analyst include. There were a lot of conversations around customer or client engagement, and some of the barriers that exist in capturing or eliciting requirements. And so just to give you guys an overview of this story, Alice comes in and wants to meet with Dilbert to collect requirements for a software that is being designed. And so she begins with the question, what are you trying to accomplish? Again, what benefit does this bring you? What are you trying to achieve? And Dilbert responds, well, I'm trying to make you design my software. Alice responds, well, what are you trying to accomplish with the software? And Dilbert responds, I won't know what I can accomplish until you tell me what the software can do. And Alice becomes visibly angry, and there's a moment of silence, probably a lot of deep breaths. And then Dilbert responds, well, can you design it to tell you my requirements? And so this cartoon strip really does point out a couple of things. So first, again, the conversational aspect of eliciting requirements and the language barrier between those who are designing it and those who are expressing the need. And so requirements gathering is just not as simple as it sounds, and it really denotes the need to adopt a language and behaviors that allow us to align. And so this presentation, I'm hoping to really point out that value can become the center. Adopting value as that centric language will help us align some of our conversations and our objectives throughout this elicitation process. All right, so documenting value with user stories. So here is an example of a user story, and more specifically, the canonical template. And it says, as a user, I want a certain goal so that I can achieve the benefit. And so as we've previously discussed, user stories allow us to document who benefits from the value the product feature offers, what a product should be able to do, and how the product feature adds value. Well, one of the challenges in Agile transformation raises the question of, well, if this is the template for user stories, well, where's the rest of it? Where do I add the details? Where do the rest of my specifications go? And so I think that's best discussed by using an example. And so this user story example is taken from Trello. But I've also have experience in Jira in working at IQVIA, and the structure itself is pretty similar in that we have a summary at the top that describes the action and the user. We also see the sprint here and the due date. And then we have the canonical template. And for this specific user story, it states, as a restaurant owner, I want to be able to register on Rom Hungry so that I can begin taking orders. And Rom Hungry is an app that this group was looking to develop. We also see attachments here, and then condition of satisfaction, also known as the acceptance criteria, which allows us to understand how and agree upon how this user story will be tested and validated to assure that it achieves the original benefit denoted in the canonical template. And so the other thing that we see here is auxiliary information. And so I pointed out the attachment here. And then we also see acceptance criteria. And then at the bottom here, we see additional auxiliary information. And so what I found in talking to different team members and in my self-study is that there's a lot of variances in how things like data requirements or just non-functional requirements, which denote the behavior of the system, for example, page load time or any other quality attributes. It's a lot of variances in to what extent or and how to add those or denote them in a user story. And I think the biggest thing that I found was that it's more so depending on the team itself to identify kind of what is all needed to include here to hand off to the development team to execute. And so for different teams that may look different, but one of the principles of Agile is, people over processes. And so it becomes a delicate balance because, of course, being able to establish norms around this within teams allows the user story elicitation process to, of course, be more fluid and consistent. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of research on this. And so, again, I think there are just varying options. Some people create separate stories for the non-functional requirements. Some will add it to the acceptance criteria. And then as we see here, there's also the option to add attachments here. And at IQVIA, we saw that for data requirements, specifically, we would see like Excel spreadsheets that would denote the data types and different data specifications being added as an attachment to a user story. And so once we have developed the user story and have met with the different team members to confirm that the user story is in a good place, we end up with 2 additional milestones that we want to kind of check ourselves against. And so I'll start with the definition of done. And this applies to, the definition of done would apply to all stories in a sprint. And so if you remember the product backlog, at the very tip of the iceberg, there were multiple stories contained within that section. And so what the definition of done says, it takes all of the stories within that sprint and says, this is our goal. Have we achieved it? Have all of these stories been accomplished? On the other hand, we have the definition of ready. The definition of ready is not outlined specifically in SCRUM, but is recommended. This is where a user story would cross the threshold and come above the borderline to say, and And with that, we're saying that the user story has these specific elements included in it that deems it ready for development. And so again, definition of ready is not something that is outlined in Scrum. It is recommended to help ensure that user stories have the information they need to be accomplished once they're handed off. And so that allows us to ensure that stories do not travel and do not continue to roll over once a sprint is completed. In both cases, what we're looking to identify at a high level is the user story valuable? Is it actionable? Is it feasible? And then more specific criteria is related to the team and environment itself. The definition of done and definition of ready are most effective when consistently applied across the entire organization, again, just to make sure that processes are aligned and consistent. And so in my scoping literature review, I came across this article or publication where there was a small to medium-sized team looking to undergo Agile transformation. And they were advised by experts in Agile to begin with these 3 non-destructive practices. They felt that these would be the easiest to implement and would ensure, I guess, the best return on the investment. And so what this diagram shows us is all of the different benefits attached to these different practices. And so for user stories specifically, we have resource management, project democratization, competence focus, and time to market being the faster first product release. And we have definition of ready, which allows us to adequately document the work that is being done and communicate, as well as communicate to understand what that even looks like. And then similarly, we have the definition of done that also contributes to documentation and communication. And then also technical quality, where we are increasing user focus and the quality of product is linked to both user stories and definition of done. All right, in our next section, we'll talk about reinforcing customer value with quality attributes. This was a product of something shared with me by my industry mentor, and which was taken from an author, Ellen Gottsteiner, who wrote Discover to Deliver, Agile Product Planning and Analysis. And what she basically proposes is a holistic, comprehensive product by centering conversation against all of these different attributes that attribute to the quality of a product. And she goes on to suggest that each of these different factors or elements be treated as equal citizens in order to really understand the whole view of the product. And so what I thought was interesting is that when we underline this with the software quality attributes, which ensures reliability of the software over time, what we see is that these 7 product dimensions have a lot of impact these quality attributes in many different ways. And so what we will end up with is a lot of different factors regarding quality that can then be rolled up into that 7th dimension for quality. Overall, the conversation to get the story ready and including all of these elements will ensure that both functional and non-functional requirements are accounted for, and that the quality attributes have been identified and accounted for as well. And so we've done all of this, but then sometimes we still find ourselves in a position where our clients are saying, well, you built what I asked for, but it's not what I need. And that takes us to our final topic here, which is navigating customer value with the inspect adapt approach. So the feedback loop is the backbone for Agile workflows. In Scrum specifically, there are multiple opportunities for feedback. We have the sprint planning section that allows us to prioritize and uh, all of the user stories that are within our backlog into releases and then sprints. We have our daily scrum that our development team and sometimes our product owner will sit in on to understand and any barriers or impediments in workflows. Then there is the sprint review that allows teams to optimize their workflow and kind of mitigate any challenges thus far. Um, or actually the sprint review is more so the demo of the features that come out of a increment or a sprint. And then the sprint retrospective is where you would teams discuss their challenges in workflow or communication to try to mitigate those before entering the next sprint. What we end up with in all of these different iterations and feedback loops is a working product. And so we achieve this with short development cycles by involving customers and business stakeholders throughout the life cycle. And that allows us to make informed decisions regarding prioritization and planning for the next cycle. And so essentially what we're trying to achieve here is optimizing for what the customer deems as valuable, and then adapting until that product meets that outcome. And so this is taken from another article that I came across in my research. And I thought this was pretty interesting. This group, again, actually the same small to medium sized team that is undergoing Agile transformation that I discussed earlier, they were looking to identify opportunities to ensure that once a user story has been signed off on, and once it has gone through development and testing, that it is accepted and achieve satisfaction with their customer base. And so they proposed 3 different changes to traditional workflow in this regard. And so one of the first things they point out is that once a user story is defined, the next initial step would be to get the user story to the user experience group where they can create visuals that could further align all of those involved around what the final product will look like. Then I think what is also interesting is that they go from user experience to testing, and here they're actually writing the functional test cases against the acceptance criteria and design. And then, and this happens prior to handoff to the development team, which means that the development team is working from more of a test-driven approach, as opposed to first doing the development and then designing how we test it. And so I think that insight allows development teams to have more clarity against the criteria in which their work will be evaluated against. And then after the test scripts are written and the development is done, the last suggestion here is that there is a demo to the business analyst or someone who is most familiar with the user story prior to formal testing against the the criteria. And so again, this allows another opportunity for everyone to sit around the table and discuss and look at the work that has been done prior to the release. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And so finally, we have this quote that I would like to leave you with. And it says, it's not about achieving Agile for Agile's sake. It's about delivering customer value and achieving better business outcomes. I would like to say thank you again to Pamela Bacchus, who spent countless hours coaching me through the Agile philosophy and Scrum framework and helping me understand user stories. My advisor here, Becky, you've been incredible with providing feedback and support, and the CHIP staff, including Mariel, who's also been a great support. Thank you all.